Okay, this week we are talking about critical thinking and problem solving, which if you've ever seen a meme like this one that says, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture and a quote with a quote next to it, Abraham Lincoln," you'll know that the reason why this is funny is because obviously Abraham Lincoln didn't say this, because if you just stop and think for just a moment, you'll realize there wasn't internet when Abraham Lincoln was alive, therefore this couldn't be a quote by him. But that's really just, in essence, the idea of critical thinking is, you just want to get into the habit of stopping and thinking about problems or information that's presented to you to make sure that you are consuming that information rationally and completely. So again, you just want to stop and think whenever you're presented with information or when you're trying to seek out information, either to solve a problem or make a decision. There's an article that I found, and you'll see things like this all over the place, but there's an article where it said a glass of red wine is the equivalent to an hour at the gym, says new study. You'll see a lot of things that say a new study, but you want to, first of all, get the details of that, okay? So don't just read one article about it, read multiple articles by multiple sources. Ideally, you want to go, if there's a study, ideally go and find the publication of that study. See what they actually said, because what is published in the research and how that is interpreted by people who are not scientists can be very, very different. So you want to seek out that source material, ask questions, ask yourself things like, what are you being asked to believe? What evidence is there for it? And what is the quality of that evidence? What are some alternative explanations? Okay. So one of the things they were looking at in this study was the levels of a certain chemical that are elevated in the system that you usually see with people who have spent about an hour working out, and you'll see similar levels to that with a glass of red wine. But that doesn't mean that a glass of red wine is the same as or just as good as spending an hour at the gym. Okay, a glass of red wine is not going to improve your muscle tone or anything like that. Okay, so equivalent in what way? All right, that's one of the questions you would want to ask. Equivalent in what way? What evidence is there for that? What are some alternative explanations? And if you're being asked to believe that, instead of working out, I can just drink a glass of red wine every day and I'll be just as healthy as if I spent an entire hour at the gym, that's just not going to be the case. So just stop and think. When we talk about critical thinking skills, we're referring to higher order thinking skills. So not all thinking is the same level of thinking. There are these lower level types of thinking. So this is foundational thinking, and these are good. But this is just things like, can you recall facts? Did you understand what those facts were? Do you know how to apply them? Okay, so that's just basic. Did you understand the information that was being presented to you? And in these sorts of questions, if you were asked that kind of question, what you were being asked is, what is the answer? And we're used to getting that sort of question, especially in K through 12 education. But what you start encountering more often in higher ed is these types of questions, where we're no longer asking, what is the answer? Most of the time, we're asking, what is your answer? And people tend to be a lot less comfortable with that. So I'll briefly go through each of these different types. So analysis. This is separating the whole into its component parts. Okay, so you might be asked questions like, what are the parts or features of such and such? Classify this according to blank. Create an outline or a diagram of this information. How does this compare or contrast with that? What evidence can you present for it? Okay, so you're being asked to take information, break apart those ideas, relate them to each other or to other concepts, answer essay questions, take assumptions and values and identify and analyze those, compare and contrast ideas and subjects. So one of the things that you're being asked to do with, for example, your interview is you're getting all this information, but then I'm asking you to break that down, break it down, and tell me what have you learned from your interviewee about either how to be successful in that particular field or how to successfully enter that field or that major, that program. What have you gotten out of that? So your interviewee may have given you a whole bunch of information, but now you need to take that information and again break it down into concepts and discuss those. And that's really what you're like this week you're being asked to outline that information. So that falls under this analysis right here. There's also synthesis. So this is combining ideas to form a new whole. So you might have a bunch of information from various sources, and they at face value might seem unrelated, but then you realize, oh, hey, wait a second. If you take all this information, the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So you might get a bunch of information and then be asked to predict or infer something, or you might be asked what ideas can you add to this, or how would you create or design a new one? That's a good one right there. What might happen if you combine this with that, or what solutions would you suggest for it? So here you're being asked to integrate ideas, build on other skills, look for interconnections, create and defend a position, and improve on an existing idea or design. Okay, so you're being asked to create something new, not just recall information, not just say, okay, this is what they said and this is what that meant, but you're asked to actually come up with new ideas on your own about that. In one of my courses, I have them create a group presentation where they have these where they each have this unique experience that they've written about, and then they come together as a group and they try to find out how can we combine our stories into one coherent presentation. Is there anything in common that we have running through our stories? And so it's an exercise in this synthesis. So taking this information, what seems to be these very different stories, and seeing is there any way that we can combine them in some way that makes sense and is coherent. What do they all have in common? So I once had a group that each of them had, what they realized that what each of them had in common was all their stories were about something happening outside the usual timeline. So one person had written about having a child very, very young. Another one, they were going back to college in their mid-60s. So, so that's not the usual timeline of things. So everyone had a story that was kind of like that. And so the title of their presentation was Timing Isn't Everything. And it was a very, very nice presentation. And that was an excellent example of synthesis, taking all these disparate ideas and combining them into a whole. And then there's evaluation. So this is developing opinions, judgments, or decisions. So when the instructor asks you, what do you think? Do you agree? How would you evaluate that? This is, that's what an evaluation is. So, what do you think about it? What is the most important? So this point right here, the what is most important, that can sound kind of like a lower level answer where it's like, well, what's the answer? What are they looking for here? It might be an evaluation question. What is most important to you? Okay. So for example, you might be asked to criticize a position. Okay, critique it, form conclusions and judgments, or list advantages or disadvantages, or develop and use a criteria. Okay, so like if you were to create you might be asked to create a rubric for an assignment if you're in teacher training. So that would be an example of evaluation, trying to decide how do you evaluate this information and decide, what counts as, excellent, good, fair, poor, etc. So you might be asked to critique a research article. Okay, so you might say, so if something says critique it, what they mean by critique is say, what are some of its strengths? What are some of its weaknesses? What are the limitations of this particular research study? Things like that, right? So you need to use critical thinking when you're trying to solve problems and make decisions. Sometimes a solution or decision might not seem very apparent, or sometimes you might jump at the conclusion that the first conclusion that pops into your head without considering alternatives. Again, with critical thinking, you want to slow down, stop and think, and consider all possibilities before you lurch forward with a particular conclusion. So first of all, define the problem. Make sure that the problem is clear. What do I know? What information do I still need? Is there context for this that I need to consider? Sometimes people get really caught up in the immediate situation, and they might make very rash decisions based on a very temporary situation. Okay. You want to then gather and interpret information. Okay, so you want to consider all possibilities. Get as much information as you possibly can. Get informed. If you don't know something, find out. All right, ask. That's why asking questions is such a big part of critical thinking. And then create some potential solutions or courses of action. Develop those plans of action. Think it through. Okay, what are some ways that this could go right? What are some ways that this could go wrong? Is there anything I'm still maybe not considering? And then just pick whichever one you think is the best. Go with it. And then later on, you can evaluate your plan. It's like, was this... why do I think this plan is the best one? Is there only one right answer? Okay, what are some potential consequences of this course of action? So it's just a process that you'll go through. Okay, you'll identify an issue or a problem. This is not an assignment. This is just like the process. You identify some issue or problem. You gather information. Okay, why it's a problem, some options for action, some potential resources that you can use or obstacles you might face, any internal biases that you might have that maybe you have or have not acknowledged, some intended outcomes and potential unintended outcomes. My kids love to watch fail videos because we'll pause and I'll say, okay, what do you think they think is going to happen here? What are they trying to do? What's their intended outcome? And then I ask them, what are some potential ways that this might go wrong? And they'll list some ways, and then we watch how this fail played out. And sometimes it's a win. So sometimes the intended outcome was the outcome. But just getting into that habit of stopping and thinking, how we know how we think it's going to go, but what are some ways that it might go differently? So then after you gather that information, develop a plan of action. So potential solution 1, list some pros and cons, potential solution 2, potential solution 3, and then eventually just make a choice. Sometimes people do all this and then they die of indecision. They never actually make a choice. Just pick one, okay? And you can always reassess later on. An example might be, let's say that there's an issue where you've missed 3 classes in the past 2 weeks. You're really all of a sudden starting to miss a whole bunch of classes. So first, stop and think about why you're missing them, because the reason why you're missing them is going to play into your potential solutions. So, maybe your babysitter keeps canceling. Maybe your car keeps breaking down. Maybe your alarm didn't go off. Maybe you have no motivation to go to the class. Okay, so these are all very different. There's a big difference between your car kept breaking down and you just don't care about the class. Then think about what are some potential consequences for missing the class. So this may or may not be a problem. If it is, then you probably really need to take some action. If you keep missing the class, what could happen? Okay, so if you have a class where attendance is a big part of the grade, or if you're not if you're not understanding the information, or if you're missing a lot of key information and announcements from that class by not being in class, you could very well fail that class if you don't start going, if you keep missing that class. So you want to, again, gather all that information. Is this a problem? Then you want to develop and implement a plan of action. Okay, so what are some possibilities to help me get to class? So if the problem is your alarm keeps failing to go off, is it broken? Do you need to get a new alarm? Do you need to just create some? Do you need to, maybe you forget to set your alarm? Do you need an alarm to remind you to set your alarm? Just really, you want to create some backup solutions to help you remember to set your alarm before you go to sleep. So based on whatever the problem is and the information you've gathered, find some potential solutions and then pick a plan of action. And then evaluate that. What decision is best for my goals and priorities? How will I ensure that this decision succeeds? So maybe if the reason why you keep missing it is you think the class is a monumental waste of time, well, do you need to stay in that class? Do you want to drop the class? Can you drop the class? This would be information that you would gather. What would be the consequences of dropping the class? Is this class required for your major? Is it a prerequisite for another class that you need to take? So you would need to, you would speak to an advisor to make sure of these things. You would gather that information because you don't want to just drop the class and then find out, oh, well, that just completely messed up my degree plan now. So again, just make sure that you've thought out everything, because if it's true that you don't need that class and it's just bringing you down, I have strategically dropped a class before because I was like, you know what, I'm either going to fail 2 classes or I can drop this one and put all my effort into salvaging the other. That was a semester that I had once. So I wasn't just taking 2 classes, but there were 2 classes that were just awful. So evaluate that, okay? All right. Now, if you ever read the news or just exist in society, you've noticed that people don't always engage in the best problem solving. So we'll talk about some barriers to that. These are some common errors that we have in judgment. One is stereotyping. Okay, so painting everyone in a certain group with the same brush. All instructors are this way, or all this, or all that. Just that stereotyping. All or nothing thinking. Sometimes we get into this mindset that we either have to completely throw something out or go all in, that we have to choose between 2 things. It's not always an always never sort of situation. Sometimes you can have a little bit of both. Snap judgments, so coming to conclusions without really thinking things through or getting enough information. So sometimes we might make a judgment about a person or a program or something just based on a very superficial information. Unwarranted assumptions. This gets people in a lot of trouble, especially in higher ed, is we assume things. So if we say, well, they didn't specifically say that would be on the test, so I assumed that it wasn't. Never assume. All right, if you're not sure, ask. Projection. Some people engage in this where they see in others what exists within themselves. So people who cheat are more likely to think that more people cheat than really do. All right, just the idea that it's like, oh, cheating is okay, everyone does it. No, everyone does not do it. It may feel like it, or you might, kind of wish that was the case to make yourself feel better, but it's not the case. Sweeping generalizations. Just because something is true for some people does not mean it's true for all people. And just because something is true for you doesn't necessarily mean it's true for something else. All right, so just because something is a problem for, just because something is not a problem for you doesn't mean it's not a problem for someone else. So again, just don't make these sweeping generalizations. We all exist in our own experiential bubbles sometimes. The halo effect. You can use this to your advantage. Good impressions matter. If we have a good impression of someone, it's very hard for us to consider that they might be doing a bad thing. Predators really, really capitalize on this. They will do everything that they can to, on the surface, to everyone else, look like a tremendously wonderful person, just a pillar of society, so that if one of their victims does come forward and lets people know that they are being victimized by this person, it makes it harder for people to believe them, because they're like, well, but this person is such a good person, they volunteer and things like that. So there's that halo effect. So that can be a common error in judgment there. And then negative labeling. We do this to ourselves a lot as well. We focus on shortcomings to the extent that we actually start discounting accomplishments, especially our own. Okay, we'll focus and ruminate, I should say, about things that we did wrong, and we don't give ourselves credit for all the times that we did something right. So don't discount yourself. So now we'll talk about some strategies for overcoming errors. I like this cartoon that says, I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. It's time to do my own research on the real truth. And so people, they'll Google that hotly debated topic. Literally the first thing that agrees with what you already believe, completely supports your viewpoint without challenging it in any way. Jackpot. Okay. Notice down here, another link. Don't worry about this one. We have a tendency to do that. Okay. It's like, we'll seek out the information, and we'll pay attention to information that already matches what we believe or want to believe, and then we discount we just kind of brush aside what we don't want to see. So some strategies for overcoming errors in judgment. One is having a positive attitude. If you have already made up your mind about the answer, then you're not going to ask the right questions or search hard enough for the answers. So critical thinking requires a willingness and a passion to explore, probe, question, and search for answers and solutions. Okay, don't be this person where someone is giving them facts and it's just bouncing off of them. Okay. When you ask questions, make sure you're asking the right kind of question. I like this. What should cost less, a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk? And the answer options they gave were yes and no. Okay, you got answers, but not to the question that you needed. All right. I don't even know what this is useless information. Yes or no what? So ask yourself, what kind of information do you need, and what kinds of questions are the most appropriate? Sometimes you just need a yes or no answer, but sometimes you're fact-finding. Okay, can you tell me more about that? Maybe you got an answer, but you're not quite sure what that means, or that answer raises more questions. So in that case, you would ask a follow-up question or a clarifying question. Maybe you are trying to get feedback on something. Okay, so how am I doing? That would be another type of question. Okay, so so if you, for example, want to know what are some ways that you can improve, on the job, there are a couple of questions you could ask. You could ask, it's like, are you asking your supervisor, is my performance satisfactory? And they might say, sure. Or you could ask them, is there anything that I can do to improve my performance at work? Those are different. You're going to get different answers there, okay? Because if they just say, yeah, I'm satisfied with this, but if you're asking for more detailed feedback, that might be what you're looking for. Okay, so figure out what information you need and ask the appropriate question. Be persistent. Okay, so just because you can't think of an option or a solution right away doesn't mean you should just give up. All right, brick walls are there to show how badly you want something. So analytical thinking requires time, persistence, and patience. Don't just throw your hands in the air at the first roadblock. Sometimes you have to get really, really creative to find a workable solution. And you have to keep at it. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Okay. And related to that, sometimes you do have to get creative. You might need to learn to think in new and fresh ways, look for interconnections, and brainstorm lots of different solutions. So you want to explore lots of different alternatives. Even if several of them you know off the top of your head are like terrible solutions, just add them to the list, okay? That way it kind of puts other solutions in perspective. There was a professor named Randy Pausch who all his life he didn't dream of being an astronaut. He just wanted like the zero-G experience. And NASA has something called, affectionately referred to as the vomit comet, which does these parabolic arcs. And right around here, when it starts to go down, you develop this sense of weightlessness, and so that they use it to train astronauts. And he had always wanted to go on the vomit comet. They say that because people tend to, get airsick with this. And he led a team. He was at Carnegie Mellon, and he led a team of students who they created this proposal, and whichever team from whichever school won the proposal, they would get to do it, and they would get to do this vomit comet thing as part of their experiment. And so his team prepared the proposal, and they submitted it, and they won. And he was so excited. My team is going to get to go on this trip. But then he hit that brick wall where he found out that under no circumstances are faculty advisors allowed to accompany the students on the zero-G plane. And he was just devastated because, I worked so hard, and my whole life I've wanted this, and you tell me I can't go. Well, he got a little creative. He found out that each team is allowed to bring a local media journalist. And so he called them up and asked where can he fax some documents. And they said, what documents do you want to fax? And he says, my resignation as the faculty advisor and my application as the journalist. And they said, that's a little transparent, don't you think? But then he made the case as to why it was worth their while. I won't go into it here, but they let him, and he went. So sometimes you just have to get really, really creative, okay? If you don't ask, the answer is always no. You want to pay attention to details. Details get people a lot, and sometimes it can be interpreted as a trick question, and many times trick questions are not actually trick questions. You just need to slow down and think about the problem. Don't overthink, but think about what's going on. What are you being asked to answer, what the problem is, what could go wrong. Make sure you recheck your calculations and look for errors. Okay, so stop and look at your answer. If it's a math problem, for example, does that seem like a reasonable answer? So go through and check on that. Gather all the relevant information. Make sure to proofread. Okay, proofreading is big. Be willing to listen to arguments, create and defend positions, and distinguish among various points of view. It's all about the details. Okay, so you really, really pay attention to details when gathering information and making decisions. We're kind of made to feel like we should get answers right now, that we should have very clear-cut answers, and we should get them right away, and everything is just cut and dried, black and white. But very often there's a lot of nuance to both the problem and the potential solutions. So you need to learn to get comfortable with those details and the nuances that come with them. And finally, you need to make sure that you're willing to see all sides of an issue. You want to think critically about what you read, hear, and see in newspapers and on the internet. Okay, so as you read, you want to question those sources and viewpoints, even and especially your favorite sources and viewpoints. Okay, so you want to, whenever you see an article or information, you want to look for, are there evidence of biases? Does this source have any potential alternative motives? Okay, so maybe there's if there's an article on why it's trendy to leave cheese all over the house, and it was written by the local mouse association. Okay, that's think about alternative motives there. Does it appeal to emotion or does it appeal to logic? Okay, so when you read a headline, does it rile you up in some way? Do you feel outraged when you read a headline? If so, that's an indication that they're appealing to your emotion and not to logic. So you want to get into the habit of reading sources from multiple viewpoints and also seeking out the most unbiased sources that you possibly can. So if you have Obama, a picture of Obama drinking a Pepsi, he was spotted drinking a Pepsi, an objective headline on that would be Obama drinks a Pepsi. But that information can also be spun. So, you might see a headline that says, Obama appeals to Pepsi fans. Well, they're reading something into that there, okay? He's drinking a Pepsi. That doesn't mean he's trying to appeal to Pepsi fans, or like, have you interviewed Pepsi fans and, determined that this raises their opinion of him? And like, was that the intention, or is it just, he was drinking a Pepsi? All right. So there's that reading into it in the headline, and you can get the same. You can also read into it in the other direction. Obama declares war on Coke. Okay, so here you have even more emotion going on there. Declares war. That's a very emotional type of statement, and so you've gone from a very simple observation to really reading a lot into that. So look out for these things when you're consuming information in the news, either in the newspapers or on the internet or social media. Don't just take something and take it at face value and then share it without thinking about it. Look it up. Find out whether or not this is actually what it seems. Sometimes people will attach old footage to new captions and make things seem like they're going on that aren't actually going on. So be aware of that. All right, so that is all I wanted to talk with you about that today. And yeah, that is it. So again, just stop and think. That's all we're asking you to do, is just stop and think.